So, and it goes on like that. So, so this, when we first started chatting, Wolfgang and I, we met at Newcastle University when I again had a similar role. I was a dean of research, and Wolfgang had actually applied for promotion to a readership. And his application, while having lots of merit, wasn't quite in the format or didn't seem to do justice to application. So I was kind of instructed to go off and talk to him and help him prepare his application. So our first encounter was sitting down with his CV and his work in front of us to try and talk about what he did and how it related to kind of promotion criteria. And I could see the problem immediately, because from his own sense of himself and his discourse about what he did, it was very hard to kind of connect it to the kind of things the university were looking for. So I started to read back to him what I found interesting about his work. So on the one hand, his presentation of his outputs was the stuff at the end, the prints, the videos, the stuff that ended, the catalogues that entered in the gallery. So I started to talk to him about how he made his work and the kind of relationships with the people who provide the scaffolding, with the construction workers, the students who were involved in actually making these works, of the various kinds of actors that he was pulling together to enable these very complex kind of art pieces to actually be enacted, the kind of planning permissions, the debates with the planning authorities, etc. And the huge complicated process that he was going through in literally assembling and choreographing these kinds of pieces. And you could see the kind of light coming and dropping in front of him here in the relationship of what his practice was really about, beyond the simple kind of final product, the fine art aesthetic kind of product. So that kind of conversation continued, and invited me to come and chair a panel discussion in one of his exhibitions and then write a piece in one of his catalogues. So the relationship was then me in a way as kind of not kind of formal art traditional critic, but interested social scientist starting to reinterpret work, which he found kind of very interesting in this dialogue. So this is, it's very poor practice to quote yourself, but to express where we were, kind of a good while ago now, and to start to give a sense of what my interests were and how I could start to connect Wolfgang's practice to my interest in terms of opening up architecture, away from this sense of the architect as the kind of auteur, kind of great mind, great person, great man, usually man, almost single-handedly producing these kind of urban visions, to a much more complex set of practices involving all kinds of human, non-human actors in particular kinds of very complex kind of urban spaces. And in terms of his work, it's almost a kind of literally creating this kind of platform, this space for discussions of what architecture was really about, what cities really were for. Little bits of work were done around some of his projects, just inviting kind of comments, and there were possibilities for people to enter kind of online comments, and very revealing in the way that Wolfgang's work really disturbed people, because it really disturbed their sense of what architecture or art was really about, because it just seemed to embody mess and complexity and difficulty and what a waste of money and why are we giving up this kind of space. So again, it invited this kind of real open kind of conversation around what architecture really is and what urbanism is, and obviously connected to a lot of debates that was still going on around science and technology studies around messy complexity. And it seemed to me through this work, in a very powerful way, and probably more powerful than me writing articles about it, here was a kind of material manifestation of that kind of process that was a very interesting thing to engage with. So the next step in our relationship then, when I think I just moved to Manchester, and Wolfgang got in touch and saying I've been invited to be part of an architecture biennale in Singapore with the theme of kind of, I think it was climate change or environment in some kind of framing anyway. Do you want to be part of the team? And given I'd just been appointed as a professor of architecture, I managed to smuggle myself into that role at Manchester, starting the centre. I was able to position myself as the architect part of it, the artist, the architecture, and Olivia Heydrich, who was an engineer at Newcastle. So we put this entry in to be part of this, to be the UK team in this architecture biennale in Singapore. So we put this proposal together, which was to develop something which became, and this was after a significant process of dialogue and changing our minds around things, but in the end we came up with this idea of a stilt house. So the reason we went for the stilt house idea is we wanted to engage with this whole idea again of kind of urban futures and Singapore, and I'm sure a number of people in the room have probably been to Singapore, is a fascinating laboratory, if it's nothing else, of kind of urbanism. And the way it's gone in a fairly short space of time, from, in kind of literally living memory, from quite a kind of slum-like kind of city of trade to this shining, kind of postmodern city, North American than the cities in North America, I think, often. And of course, the original architectural typology of that kind of area has almost totally gone now. And if you're lucky, you can find it in a kind of open living museum kind of setting. But again, of course, this was still quite a strong architectural form within living memory. So we decided to use this as a device to try and contrast these different, the urban past, the urban future, and to suggest that this actually wasn't a kind of predetermined trajectory. This was about political choice. Now, the other element of this story, which is what Angela ran back for, was this. And I'm going to pass this around. This is called Aquadyne. And it was developed by Olivier Heydrich, the engineer at Newcastle. And it's essentially compressed recycled plastic. It's used in kind of sustainable urban drainage. It's used on green roofs. And Wolfgang, as soon as he spotted it, saw a fantastic opportunity as a kind of a building material he could use in his artwork. Which, of course, for this project, he had used it before this project. This project, given its kind of focus on climate change, seemed a brilliant material to actually use. So we actually used this material and shipped it out from the UK to Singapore, and then it stayed in Singapore and it's kind of buried in some kind of project there. But there seemed to be a nice metaphorical kind of journey there about plastics, which have been moving around and then got reused in this. Whoop.
Sorry,
I don't think that's me. Someone's calling me.
Sorry.
The global world we live in.
Somebody's in trouble.
So I'm not going to go through all the kind of facts, and we wrote paper up around this. But the idea again was to do this interdisciplinary collaborative work, architecture, engineering. Here's a picture of the kind of Aquadyne, but even better, you can see a very small piece of it there. So we produced this stilt house on, how many people know Singapore? Orchard Road, which is the premier shopping. So we didn't get a lot of choice about sites, but this actually in the end seemed perfect. It was this one little tiny oasis of green in this kind of temple to consumerism, really, where we erected this stilt house. And one of the key things, and actually that came out of the conversation, Wolfgang, I think there's an interview with him in the book, he talks about this, is the moment where we decided it was really important to make this piece permeable, that people could go in there to have conversations. So we literally made it a kind of platform for kind of conversation and dialogue. And I did lots of kind of vox pops kind of interviews there with people, trying to entice them up and have conversations around Singapore and the city. And we got people there talking about their memories of actual stilt houses. And starting to talk about the direction that Singapore had taken, etc. So it became this kind of space, this platform where people could actually have debates about kind of urban form and urban futures. So that was sadly it was only up for about a week. It would have been great to leave it longer, because in that kind of climate you could imagine all kinds of things happening to the Aquadyne in terms of things growing in it and changing colour and whatever. So it was a shame we couldn't leave it for longer. But having done that, we decided we should try and do something which did have a slightly longer time span if we could. But as ever, getting funding for these kinds of projects seemed very challenging. But Wolfgang is a very determined person, and we kept on meeting and talking, and we developed an AHRC bid without a great deal of hope. But actually, having developed this bid, we put it in and we got it funded. And the project was called Jetty, and it was to, well, this is the, these were the kinds of research questions directly from the kind of proposals. So had the usual kind of problem trying to translate our kind of our interests and our very open methodological approach to a kind of standard research grant application. You will probably face those kinds of challenges, I would imagine. But we had to frame it in the kind of way of how can public artworks animate community involvement in advancing, exploring sustainability issues, what are the range of environmental concerns mobilised in these debates, etc., and what's the potential legacy and impact. Hence where we ended up with the title of Catalyst and the kind of our current concerns about the idea of being a catalyst. again, in order to do this, and this was a big part of the project, both in terms of getting the bid together, and I guess increasingly as researchers we're all involved in this, because the days when you could kind of develop a proposal almost on your own and just say what you were going to do and plan the outputs have almost gone now, I think, really. From the beginning now, you have to have a sense of who else is going to be involved, who's going to be interested, to what degree are they directly involved and directly benefiting the project. It's just kind of becoming standard, but particularly so in projects like this, in which we have to assemble, not only assemble people who are interested, people who are actually going to supply things like large amounts of scaffolding and things, and local authorities and etc. are going to allow us to do things. So when you're putting big structures on listed kind of monuments, it gets very, very complicated. So we had to assemble all of that in advance just to get the agreements to do the project, and then of course the usual thing, once you get the money you have to actually make it happen. So what is a state? How many people know what a state is? We work actually primarily for, this was Angela's work, we've established this is actually quite a global typology. So a state is it's a kind of landing platform. Angela, you correct me if I'm saying anything incorrect here. A landing stage in which you have the railway tracks, so it's linked to a coal mine, I guess, a distribution centre. The trains actually drive on top of the stays and actually deliver the coal, or in this, is this wood on this one? Materials that are often coal, onto a ship to go off to kind of power stations. Is that right? Have I?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more or less right. So you can see various ones. Was this one Pittsburgh?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. This one, you get the idea of what they are. Now, Dunstan states, there were a number along the time, quite a number of these. This is the last one standing. It's listed now and reputed to be the largest wooden structure in Europe. You're looking at it to make sure I got this right.
Yeah, not just contradicting me yet, so.
Yeah, okay. So here we are, 1970, I think it went on operating until the 80s, more or less, though obviously very sporadically at that time. You can see the kind of industrial area it is. There are other images within the book.